webinar, which is aimed at careers leaders or any teachers coming along to our generation events in Hertfordshire this academic year. The purpose of this video is to share some really good best practice that we've got with you, provided by a careers leader from one of our schools where we always get fantastic feedback from. So thought it'd be really good just to hear from her and for Julia to share her experiences. So let me introduce her. Julia is the careers leader at Bishop's Hatfield Girls' School. Julia, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome.
And say very much so, we just want to tap into some of the things that you do to help prepare your students, prepare your colleagues, and just make sure really that coming along to the generation events that you've been to are really genuinely impactful and have a legacy with your students. So firstly, you come along to the Generation Well in Hatfield event. This year there are 9 events. So we think every school in the county will have access to at least one of them. We give you exactly the same brief that we give to every other school though. So firstly, how do you select which students to bring along to the event?
In our school, we do quite a lot of careers events, and I quite like the idea of choosing children that are in the middle strata, because we feel like at the top end, a lot of the higher achievers will probably have people at home who might be able to guide their careers, and we feel sometimes that maybe the lower attainers, those students tend to have more support from school, maybe direct them to college, different briefs, more careers counselling. There's a big chunk of students that we feel don't always get the opportunity to have the careers advice or this sort of careers, access to careers, and we've chosen it from that section. I then ask the form tutors, you know them, it's year 11, so pastorally they have got to know the students really well. So if there is a PP person or there is somebody who feels might benefit from within their class of 30, then I ask them to give me, I don't know, a dozen, 14 possibles with that kind of brief, and then I'll go over it with each form tutor to check who the students are, and then I'll offer it out to the students. And I have to say I probably get almost 100% response, because it's quite nice for them, because these are sometimes students that don't always get focused on, so they're quite flattered, and it's also a nice opportunity to go and meet some of the people in the local area. So so that's how we do it here.
Sure. Okay, so really interesting things you said there about identifying which ones to bring with you. In your case, it's a year 11 event. Not every generation is the same. So some of you watching this might be thinking, well, we've got our year 10s being invited or our year 12s. We tend not to be too prescriptive. We want to make sure that the students that you're bringing, however many places we allocate you, are the ones that are going to need it the most. And there's obviously a lot of interaction that you have, Julie, with the form tutors in the first instance. How far ahead do you normally start that process?
Planning wise, I mean, it's in the calendar now, so all staff can see it. I probably go out to form tutors probably the very beginning of January, the first week or so, so six weeks before, probably 6 to 8 weeks before, asking them to then allocate me names. Then I can obviously then send out letters and get parental consent, etc., for them to go. So it's relatively early, because it's a relatively quick thing to do, but obviously teachers have a lot of things to do, so they don't like to get too fast a turnaround. If I give them enough time, then they can spend that time and not feel pressurised. So yeah, between 6 and 8 weeks.
And do you ever get any challenges or objections from teachers when you're saying, look, I want to bring this student out for the generation event?
Obviously with year 11, any careers or any event actually often gets a challenge, because we're at that level of delivering content. That's why maybe year 10 some schools might prefer, but for us, because it's only for a couple of periods, I find that 1 or 2 periods makes it much more palatable to take the students out, because they're only missing, say, 1 double period, which they can obviously then catch up on. If they're missing an entire day for an event, then that's a little bit more concerning for lots and lots of teachers. So I find the fact that the Generation Conference is for a short period actually quite conducive to getting my students out to see it. So yeah.
And are there any other admin hoops that you have to jump through to get them there?
No, I mean, literally, because we have to get the authority of the parent to take the child out, I do find we have to chase through letters. But then I've found more recently, I've done quite a lot of letters and I've added Google Forms into them. And then literally the parent, when they've read it, rather than having to hand anything back, which is quite traditional, if they click on the Google link and they just go, yes, they can go, I give permission if there's any photo requirements, I found that I get a much higher response rate and a much quicker response rate, and it's less laborious for like form tutors chasing, for example. They don't have to, because the Google form does the work for them. So I've like improved that on last year to do it that way.
Okay, so you've done all your admin, you've selected your students, you've got all the necessary consents for them, you know what time they're coming. What sort of preparation do you do with them ahead of the event? Because this is where we see an employer's feedback to us. There's often quite a big discrepancy between those students and schools that are really well prepared and those that aren't. So what's your process?
I'll then, once I've got my list of 50, I'll then ask to see them either after an assembly or possibly a break time. So they'll get messages through their form members to have a meeting with me for 15 minutes over a break time, say the week before. And I'll brief them as to the fact that it's a privilege to go to these things and it's a great opportunity for them. We'll talk about the fact there's obviously goodie bags and it's quite exciting, but the idea is what they've got to get out of it. So the idea of networking, we push quite heavily on networking to get careers, get work experience options, which they would have done in year 10. So I maximise that discussion about you're building your network, you're getting opportunity to see people locally who might be interested in you. You need to go there, you know, looking smart because you're representing the school. You need to go around and get your goodies, but at the same time, you need to be asking questions. So I might give them a couple of questions about, you know, what is your job? How would you get into it? What age is a good age to get into that career? If it's like Simmons Bakers, or I think we've had like Barclays Bank there, etc. So they are given a brief. They are given the little booklet you gave us as well of all the different people who are in there, so they can do a bit of prep if they want to. I say to bring a pen. I also remind them that they start thinking about giving contacts away, that really they need to ask the actual conference person to give them their email rather than give their emails out. So they obviously can build a connection, but making sure that they're sort of safe on the electronic side of things. So yeah, it does.
So we can still hear you. So
yeah, so here, so yeah, so there are things we do. So it's like a quick meeting, and effectively it's it gears them up to know that they're doing something that is fun but has got a proper, sensible, long-term benefit to it.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned the workbooks that we get. Our aim is always to get them out to schools at least a week in advance. And again, the feedback that we got about your students was that they clearly all had those workbooks and they'd actually been filling in notes in there. So you've mentioned the fact that we try and list the employers or the exhibitors that are going to it, so they've got a bit of an idea about who they want to talk to. And then also there's a list of icebreaker questions. Now, this is something I think probably we as adults don't always give enough thought to, that if you put a 15, 16-year-old in front of a room of employers and tell them just to go and start a conversation, that's actually quite a daunting thing to do, isn't it? So how did your students deal with that, and were those icebreaker questions useful, or are there any particular questions or conversations?
Yeah, the icebreaker questions are quite useful. I found that I'm quite an active networker myself anyways, and I got quite a lot of leads out of the conference for different events I'm going to. But so I would often talk them through how to do it, and then I would model it for them when I was there. And if I was walking around talking, I'd often pop up next to them and find, oh, what are you talking about, Vanessa? And what, you know, and trying to bring them into a conversation to show them how to do it. And also so they can get some kind of contact with the person, because I'm quite keen for future work experiences in, say, year 12, for them to build their own network. So I'll probably do it through a form of showing they've got some questions and then maybe modelling it and then standing next to them on the stalls to try and encourage it.
Yeah, okay. Now, the hidden part that lots of people don't think about when they're preparing these events is what your teachers or what your colleagues do when they're coming along with you. So again, we've seen some examples where teachers are there and they are there just to stop students leaving the event or the venue in some cases. We see other ones where they get them off the bus, and then that's kind of it in terms of their involvement. Your teachers and you, though, I know, were really proactive in working the room yourself. So what directives do you give to your colleagues that are attending?
Well, I usually have one person who comes with me, and I ask her to, you know, to go up and make sure that the students are safe and feel comfortable, and to sort of shadow them a little bit, so that maybe if there's a colleague standing next to them, they're going to feel more confident to actually talk to the adult. So having somebody they know behind them. I then probably take the lead on making sure I whiz round and I'm actively getting them to use their time. So I will be sort of, if someone says to me they're interested in, I don't know, Sky, then I'll be dragging them off to the Sky stand and then trying to introduce them. So I'm probably slightly more proactive, but I do ask the person who's with me to encourage them to go to stands, to make sure they're mingling, and just stand with them sometimes just to give them extra confidence.
Yeah, and I know that you've used the opportunity to actually go and network with employees and get them to come back into your school afterwards, haven't you?
Yeah, I do a lot of that, I'm afraid, Gareth. I'm terrible. I'm a terrible doorstepper. If you give me an inch, I'll take a mile. So I got at least 2 or 3 people coming into my mock interviews from that who I didn't even know. So yeah, I mean, you've got to practice what you preach, and I think that's the way of building networks. So I quite like the event for that reason myself. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, and so you've obviously benefited from that subsequently.
Yeah.
So once the students have left the event, what do you then do to follow up with them to make sure that there's some form of legacy and impact from it?
Well, we have life skills lessons, so I'll let the life skills person who's looking after, you've got a head of life skills, make sure there's somewhere in the next careers lesson there's a reference to it. But obviously we have to be careful because those 50 are only 50 out of 150. So it's flagging there has been an event and maybe what they've got out of it so the others can share it. Haven't done, I must admit, for development for this year, I'd probably look at doing more formal evaluation, probably like a Google form or something from them. Either sort of just slightly afterwards or a week after. I do ask them in the bus as we come back how they felt about it, what they got out of it, but it's very ad hoc. It's kind of, you know, not just what you got out of the goodie bag, but who did you talk to? How did you find that? So we do have a debrief in the bus, but it is obviously quite short. So I will look at developing the evaluation more in the future.
Yeah, sure. And again, we've had feedback and we've seen from the research that we've done that where schools are then subsequently discussing the event, you know, in a life skills session sounds like it's a really apt place to do that, even if it's just informed time. If the students can still remember 2 or 3 of the employers that they'd spoken to a week after, the chances are they're going to remember that, and the messaging and the conversations they've had are going to be slightly longer lasting. Most generation events we have this twilight session, which is the event outside of school hours, which students from any year group can go. They generally tend to go with parents. What did you do to promote that? Because again, really noticeable that lots of your students and their parents were coming back to the twilight session.
I sent out letters under my header to anyone who was over the age of year 9. And then I made sure that the sixth form hub, which is our Google Classroom, that again, it was publicised. And also after the event, I suppose I publicised the event in a newsletter. So there's a lot of publicity around it to encourage them to go by themselves as part of their decisions at whatever stage they're at. So obviously that's broadening it from year 9 all the way up to year 13, the twilight session. So yeah, it's good to hear it was quite effective.
Yeah, no, it was. Now, you probably covered a lot of this already, but I just wanted you to be able to articulate what tips and guidance would you give to other careers leaders watching this at the moment if they're preparing for a generation event?
Well, obviously the classic thing on careers advisors and careers leaders tend to not have that much time, so doing it early. Making the task for the form tutors not very onerous, because then that keeps you quite popular and doesn't like drag out the timescales. The whole thing of making sure you meet with your students as a cohort, whoever you've chosen beforehand, and really explaining to them what they're going to get out of it before they go, I think is really valuable, because then setting them a couple of objectives of what they've got to get out of it, whether it's 1 or 2 little connections or 1 or 2 companies that they think they might be interested in from the your pamphlet. I think setting those parameters is a really important thing. And then I think modelling networking, to be honest, because that's what the whole event's about. And it is terrifying, networking, particularly for young people, talking to people they don't know. So if you're modelling it and then getting involved in it, then you're going to maximise it and make it seem less scary for them, because they're going to have to do it in the future to manage their careers. So yeah, I'd probably say those 3 things.
Great. Okay. And then just finally, how does your participation at the Generation event, how does it support your wider careers programme?
Well, the careers programme obviously covers, for the Gatsby benchmark, covers everything from year 7 through to year 13. So this is a nice thing to do for year 11. Again, by picking those ones that probably haven't had as much careers attention, it's quite useful. And year 11, because we have year 10, year 12 doing work experience, year 11's got a lot of exam commitments. So just doing something that's relatively short and sharp and targeted, I think is quite effective for that year group. And then it helps us cover the whole gambit.